Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second set of lecture for 4.2. In reality, we're going to use this as a bridge to 4.4 because we're going to finish talking about the three case studies in this unit that we didn't talk about in 4.2. So we're going to take a look at the Dutch, the British, and the French here quickly and help us lead into 4.4 maritime empires established. And remember, okay, we're looking at maritime exploration that's occurring during this period of 1450 to 1470. All right, so the first of the three case studies we're going to look here briefly are the French. So let's briefly talk about the French explorers and what they're going to do to kind of set up their maritime empire. All right, so first off, when we're talking about the French, English, and the Dutch, you need to understand that when they go to explore the Americas, and because of the previous events that went into the establishment of the Spanish and Portuguese empires, they were really looking for what was known as the Northwest Passage. There was a believed passage that could make its way through the northwestern part of the globe to East Asia, and in reality, this wasn't there, but they thought it was there because there was at least tales that it could be found. And it's because, remember, these three, they wanted a free access um, pass or free access or their own access to the Spice Islands in Asia, just like we saw with what the Portuguese and the Spanish wanted. They wanted a direct access route to those Spice Islands. So do these three groups. So it's not there, okay, but they're going to ultimately found their own empires in the Americas based on what they do find. So let's talk about the French Empire that's established. And the French Empire that's established is kind of going to is really going to be kind of a mixture of the other two that we're going to talk about, the Dutch and the English. And you're going to see some similarities of this empire with the French or the Spanish and the Portuguese as well. But the big selling point for the French Empire in the Americas, most notably in North America, was the fact that they find their riches in trade of not gold, but they find it in furs, in particular beaver pelts. And they're going to establish a strong empire in Quebec, so north uh, eastern Canada, as really their trading post. And it's this is where what I mean by the previous statement, it's kind of a cross between the other two that we're going to talk about, the Dutch and the British, because it's not technically a trading post empire, but it's also not technically one that's a colonial empire because the numbers just aren't there. But they do establish significant colonial outposts that are also functioning, obviously, as trading posts. But over time, as the French develop this trade in beaver pelts and other furs, you see missionaries that are flooding into New France and um, interacting with the Native Americans and converting them to Catholicism. And we're going to see this as an important cultural exchange in the Americas, particularly in New France, and during this period, is the conversion of these Native American cultures to Catholicism. All right, and then the other flip side of this trade in fur for the French is also going to mean that the Native Americans are going to get access to European goods, and this is going to be kind of the bigger part of the interaction, at least early on, where the Native Americans are going to access to European goods. It's kind of going to come from the French rather than, let's say, the British or the Dutch, at least initially, and then as time develops, the English will play a bigger role in that trade. All right, so let's talk about New France a little bit here. And this is kind of what I was talking about in terms of what they rarely settled in permanent situations outside of their trading areas and their areas that end up becoming forts to control the wider ranging places. And in particular, you can see on the map five important posts the French established and controlled in Louisbourg, Quebec, Montreal, Detroit, and New Orleans. And what we can see is as we look at these case studies, particularly with the French and the English, as well as the Spanish, the population, European population that's going to be in New France is going to be quite small. So in 1754, at the very beginning of the French and Indian War, the French population is really only about 70 to 80,000 people, whereas in the English population, the 13 colonies and then the area around Hudson's Bay, it's roughly about 1 million, maybe a little bit more. And the French just aren't getting the numbers there. It wasn't that they weren't trying, so that's kind of why they're not technically just a trading post empire, but not totally a colonial one either, is because they were trying to get the people there, but there just wasn't enough coming over. But again, it's all about, for them, it's all about trade with the Native Americans for fur and controlling some key points along the St. Lawrence River Valley, the Great Lakes, and then the Mississippi River with New Orleans. All right, so now we're going to move on to the English and their empire. And we obviously know a lot about them. You guys should be a lot more familiar with the English Empire with your connections and understanding U.S. history. But let's talk about what they do. And you got to remember, England, they're going to become, during this period, they're going to become the naval power. And they're going to rule the waves for the next 400 years or so until that moniker goes to the United States. But in 1497, the English send a man by the name of John Cabot on an expedition across, or exploration across the Atlantic Ocean. And he claims Newfoundland, which you can see on the screen, and Chesapeake Bay, which is down here in Virginia, in the Maryland area, for the English. Now, at this point, even though England is very, very skilled on the seas, they're not strong enough to deal with the Spanish Navy. So again, this is one of the other reasons why they're trying to find the Northwest Passage, is because from a naval standpoint, they can't deal with the Spanish if there is a war. But they're going to get there. Now, let's talk about the Spanish Navy and the Spanish Armada. So there's going to be some conflicts that are going to develop across Europe between the British and the Spanish, as well as others. But ultimately, what's going to happen is going to be, there's going to be a conflict that's going to deal with the throne in England and the religion of England, and so forth. So basically, you have the English, which are Protestant, the Spanish are Catholic. There's some backing in terms of the Spanish on them viewing that the English throne should be led by a Catholic or held by a Catholic person, and so forth. So eventually, what ends up happening is the Spanish send a huge fleet to attack England in 1588. Now, this is where we can actually see a comparison in world history, or a synthesis opportunity in what actually happens to the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada is defeated by the British fleet, but really it wasn't because the British fleet outnumbered them or was more skilled. It was because of storms and then disease within the actual trip that the Spanish fleet was either damaged, or its effectiveness was much, much lower because of these actions, like the storm and disease on their ships. So the English are able to defeat the Spanish Armada, cause heavy losses, and gain control of the seas. And back to what I was saying in terms of, here's a comparison or a synthesis opportunity, is we can look at this as a similarity to the Mongol invasion, or at least attempted Mongol invasion of Japan, where you had the kamikaze, or the divine wind, that actually damaged their fleet in their invasion to try to take Japan twice. And here's a connection here. You can actually talk about that and see, look, here's a similarity between how Britain was ultimately saved versus Japan being saved from two invading powers, the Spanish and the Mongols. All right, here's a painting you can see of the fighting going on with the English and the Spanish in the Spanish Armada period. All right, so now we're going to talk about the first significant settlement of the English. And remember, the English, they're the colonial empire. If we're going to talk about these 5 empires within this section that are European, yes, the Spanish established a really strong colonial empire, but the colonial empire that's going to develop is going to be the English. And where does it start? It doesn't start in Jamestown, but the first successful colony is in Jamestown in 1607. Now, I do recommend that you guys, I'll put the regular one in classroom for you. Please do take a second after this slide. There's a very short video that talks about the harsh existence and harsh life that went on at Jamestown, but it was the first successful colonizational attempt by the English in the Americas. And then from that point on, they're going to go on, establish what is going to be known as the 13 colonies, and go to establish an empire that's going to ultimately cover a huge, significant piece of the land surface. But more on that later. All right, now on to our third case study, Dutch exploration. So the Dutch, they kind of get started in their venture for the Northwest Passage in 1609 when Henry Hudson goes on an exploration attempt trying to find that passage, and they come across what is ultimately going to be um, known as the Hudson River and Hudson Bay and so forth. So they're looking for the Northwest Passage. He goes through the east coast of North America, comes across several different places, but ultimately he settles in an area that they're going to call New Amsterdam. He's going to purchase. The Dutch are going to purchase an island that is going to be known as Manhattan from the Native Americans for the equivalent of $24, and they're going to found control in a trading post um, area around the Hudson River Valley, and this place is going to be known as New Amsterdam. And from this point, the Dutch are going to control really transatlantic trade in this area for not a long period of time, but at least a short period of time. And their main place is here in New Amsterdam. Now, real quick, before we finish up, I want to mention this because there's going to be a conflict between the British and the Dutch here over New Amsterdam. And ultimately, the Dutch are going to lose and going to be pushed out of the New World, at least in terms of as the controlling interest. Dutch are still going to stay there and live because the English allow them to, but they're going to be pushed out because the British are actually going to go and take New Amsterdam from the Dutch, mainly because New Amsterdam was sitting as a kind of breaking up the British colonial efforts along the east coast of North America, whereas you had kind of the Plymouth colony, the Massachusetts Bay colony that was developing that was English controlled, and then you had Jamestown and Virginia and Maryland and all that stuff were being controlled by the British. Well, what sits in the middle? The Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, and the British are going to go after the Dutch because they want to connect their colonial possessions there on the east coast of North America. All right, guys, that's all I got for you for the three case studies. There's a thesis I want you guys to develop and think back to 4.2 with the case studies over the Dutch or the Spanish and the Portuguese as well. But develop a thesis here. Explain the causes and effects of the state-sponsored expansion of European maritime exploration in the period of 1450 to 1750. If you guys can do that for me, please put it in your notes, either in 4.2 or 4.4. That'd be great. Just a little thesis practice for you to get ready for document-based questions or long essay questions. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next one.